Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is the weekly chart of gold provided by netdania.com. You can click on the link below. Wanted to take a look at gold in some different currencies here just to show you how the picture is shaping up. You can see down here that the MACD is starting to round up and looking like it's going to cross over. Now that's in the US dollar. The formation in the US dollar is this pennant or flag formation that we have here. It could be drawn as kind of a flat pennant on the bottom. But what's interesting is that when we get to the other currencies, and we're going to start with the strongest gold formations first, that's going to be with the euro. And you can see with the euro, it's not at all like it is in the US. This pennant formation is kind of the opposite. It's more like it's flat at the top and rising down below, whereas if you remember, the other one looks sort of like this. So that's interesting that the euro gold price is so much stronger. Now also, if you'll note that the MACD has already crossed on the weekly here in the euro, and it's also above the zero line, never really crossed below it. So the next one is the Swiss franc. Of course, we know that the Swiss effectively pegged their currency to the euro, and you can see a similar sort of flat top pennant formation sort of thing here, and also the crossover in the MACD. The next one we want to look at is the Canadian dollar. And that's not quite as strong. That one's more like the US. It's kind of 50-50 here as far as that pennant. And you can see there was an attempted cross and then a failure. And then the last one we're going to look at is the Australian dollar. And the Australian had a near cross, and then you can see we're actually kind of falling on that one back down to this old support, which is really old, goes all the way back to 2008. So different formations in the different currencies. Of course, the one thing they all have in common is that they're bull markets. So gold is bull market in all the currencies, but it's stronger in some than in others. Now I wanted to go over to the question of the night, and there's a lot of questions here. I'll try to address as many as I can. This is from Travis. Return to gold, silver standard. How would you explain how a new monetary system using gold and or silver might be introduced? When nations have a monetary collapse, the government usually devalues the currency and eventually uses a new fiat currency. It seems easier for a country to get off a gold and silver standard rather than go on it. How would a Western nation return to gold and silver when governments have virtually no stockpiles, especially silver? Even if the U.S. was to nationalize all the mines that produce silver, it would still only give each person about a tenth of an ounce of silver based on yearly mine production. Would we then have fractional reserve silver? Well, they always seem to end up with some kind of fractional reserve system regardless. The reason why I advocate a bimetallic standard is because if you have both of the metals trade freely, and they can trade against each other, and they can be a fair price can be determined. Now that's true about silver. The amount may be not enough, but again, with the divisibility and fungibility of both silver and gold, that's not really an issue. They already sell grams of silver. So, but I don't foresee a time when people are actually trading the metal itself. I mean, it would probably be electronic, backed by the metal, and then of course that's going to bring in the issue of fraud, and we'll see that the moral hazard and moral issues when we look at the topic of the night with the drug trade. But with the fractional reserve system that would develop, of course, you know, we've seen it in all these scandals. It doesn't matter how many laws you pass, if people break the law, if the regulators are captured, if people are dishonest, if there is no moral sense in a nation, then it doesn't matter how many laws you have, they're going to break them. So yes, you may want to have a physical system in place until a new system is there, but there's no reason why gold and silver can't be the basis of an electronic system. Now silver, of course, if it's brought back as money, and the intent is to destroy its function as money, that's what the cabal has been doing for over 100 years, is the attempt to destroy silver. Now, it's my contention, I've said many times, that one of their goals is to make silver so rare that it can't return as money, and make it rarer than gold, and make exactly this argument. So, and I think they've fairly well succeeded. But then again, if silver were $1,000 an ounce, then you'd find a lot of silver coming onto the market pretty soon, because as I pointed out before, you know, people talk about how much silver is used up. Well, silver's never used up. Silver and gold are never used up. The law of conservation of matter states that there's the same amount of silver as there always was. In fact, there's more available above ground as it's mined every year. The problem is the price is so low that it's discarded in unrecoverable amounts at this price. Now, if you had $500 to $1,000 silver, you would probably see all kinds of technologies come about to recover that very valuable silver that's being thrown away. Could not government bankers simply say we will not accept gold and silver as money through law or force, leaving them to continue to control the money supply? This, after all, is what happens when a government decides to go with fiat money. Also, seeing how central banks are holding more and more gold, could not silver be continued to be sidelined and left as an industrial, albeit expensive metal? Thanks, keep up the good work. Now, yes, silver could be sidelined, and I know that FOFOA argues that there's a gold standard coming, free gold, and silver won't be a part of it. Silver always goes up with gold, and it always has, so even if gold goes to the free gold price, I think silver is going to tag along with it and ultimately surpass it. Even if silver were just left as an industrial metal, an investor metal, and not as a monetary metal officially, I think the price potential is still enormous. So you have to remember that the governments that decide on fiat money, you can't speak of the governments or the bankers as a unified force. We still live in a world where there are countries that compete against each other for the value of their currencies. So if we lived under a one world government, and if we lived under a totalitarian system, then absolutely you could have a situation where they could declare anything to be the case, and if they had the power to enforce it, then they could make that so. I don't think we're at that stage right now. I think that the Eastern powers are accumulating gold and silver, and they fully intend to back their currency with gold and silver, and make the others worth a lot less by default. So hopefully that's some answers to those questions. It's a very deep topic and can go on a long way. So I want to jump over the main story of the night. This is on Jesse's Cafe, and it's the Jesse's Crossroads Cafe blog spot. And this is about the HSBC scandal. Now, if you remember, more than a decade ago, you had BCCI, which was the Bank of Crooks Criminals International. You remember everybody and their dog was implicated in that, and the whole thing was hushed up. And it basically was a situation where too many of the important people would have been implicated, and so they just kind of swept that whole thing under the rug. But here's another one here with HSBC and drug money laundering, deals with Iran, and a record billion-dollar fine. And I'll read a little bit of this. There is chatter in banking circles that HSBC is about to be handed a record fine of $1 billion. Oh, that's great. So they're going to take it from one pocket of the bankers give it over to the government. That's very helpful. Or more. At least this is what I hear. Obama will point to it as a get tough approach to the rampant fraud and bad behavior that is still plaguing the U.S. recovery and financial system. You think? The U.S. has been looking to make an example that whilst some banking excesses might be tolerated, there are areas of dirty financial dealing that go a step too far and need to be dealt with, especially if the perpetrator is not in the official stable of monetary mavens. The august senators are still chafing at having to kowtow publicly to some of the pampered princes of Wall Street whose deep pockets fill their campaign coffers. Stephen Green made barren of Pierpoint in November 2010, and the former head man at HSBC, a conservative politician and current cabinet minister for trade and investment, will almost certainly plead the CEO defense for the crimes that were committed during his tenure over at the bank. Now, remember the, I believe it was the Sarbanes-Oxley bill that we had here in the United States, and we were assured that there wouldn't be this CEO defense, and that CEOs would be held accountable for whatever happened under their watch. But again, these reform bills never seem to ever reform anything. You've got Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, you've got all kinds of these regulations, but again, it's just a criminal behavior and captured regulators, and it's never seems to be fixed. It just goes on and on. His profile is rather high now because his role in the London Olympics. When government officials and candidates refuse to answer questions or disclose information, they often have something to hide, especially it involves some of the dodgier financial havens in the world where cash is king and the law is just a piece of paper. The deals with Iran rankle, but the drug money laundering through HSBC in Mexico and Brazil was utterly over the top. I expect some of their money dealings in the Cayman Islands might prove interesting if they ever come to light, given the people and firms that are involved, but that's very likely for another reason. Let's see what happens. So he's hinting at here the Cayman Islands and some of the offshore money laundries, and I just want to address that issue a little bit here and pull up some statistics. First of all, let's start out with some statistics on drugs. These actually come from this report here. This is UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. It's actually a 272-page report that a lot of the articles pull from, but you can see it's full of all kinds of charts and graphs and everything. Very interesting report. I'll link it if you have the time to read it. But the upshot of it that's cited in this article here, it's from a Russian site, but I've cross-referenced it with other sites. These numbers seem to be about right. They're also pulled out of that report, and but the numbers vary. No one really knows. But these are the numbers reported here in this article. United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, and the International Monetary Fund estimate profits derived from illicit drug trafficking worldwide are about $600 billion. That's just the profits, or 7.6% of global trade. Up to $1.5 trillion in drug money are laundered through legal enterprises, accounting for 5% of global GDP. Given these figures, the drug trade can legitimately be seen as its own sector within a larger black market economy. Currently, criminal organizations get 70% of their revenue from illicit drug trafficking, the profit margin, etc. Now, you've got 5% of global GDP, and as we heard in the last article, they're talking about the Cayman Islands or whatever. Let's look at the, and this is just, I chose to use US, but if you do World Banks, then China is in there. These are the 10 largest banks in 2012, and they're ranked by market cap. You can see Capital One's there at 21 billion. Bank of New York Mellon 25 billion, Morgan Stanley 35, PNC Bank 31, Goldman Sachs comes in at 53 billion, US Bank Corp 54 billion, Bank of America 71 billion, Citigroup 86 billion, JP Morgan Chase 140 billion, and Wells Fargo $160 billion. So you can see these add up to roughly maybe $600 billion in total value. I don't think it's even that high. So you can do the math. But the question I would like to ask is, if the profits derived from the illegal drug trade are $600 billion, how is it possible that that money is not in these banks? I don't think that it is possible. $600 billion, you can't hide $600 billion in the Cayman Islands. It's an inescapable conclusion that the $600 billion of drug money that is laundered and trafficked every year in the world has got to be going through these banks. There's no other conclusion you can possibly draw. And if that's the case, then this HSBC thing is just a slap on the wrist. All these banks, just like BCCI, have to be, they must be, just by the raw numbers, knee-deep in drug money. Now, the drug money is actually a fairly recent phenomenon. The illegal trade of drugs really has only exploded in value in the last few decades. You need to go back maybe 3 decades or so. At the beginning of the 60s, a lot of the drugs were actually legal. If you go back to the 30s, almost all the drugs were legal. You had your jazz musicians smoking marijuana, and you had your carnival barkers with their special potion, and you had the doctors with their laudanum and things like that. But for the most part, the drugs were legally obtainable. Some of them were special recipes that people sold and things like that. Now we've entered into a world of high finance drug profits, and it's clear by the numbers, it has to be the case, that the banks are filled with this drug money. So of course my position is a libertarian position on drugs. I think that the damage done to our society by the prohibition of these drugs, including the crime, the prisons being filled up, not only that, as Ron Paul has pointed out, the violations of civil liberties, the fact that police come with a battering ram, they don't even produce a warrant, there's nobody there to read it, they just bust down the door. And all of these factors, when you add them together, I think that it's a good reason that we need to decriminalize, we need to legalize most, if not all, or at least decriminalize these, and get this $600 billion worth of profit, get that incentive out of the system. Now, of course, the people who are making this money, and there's a lot of people who have alleged who those people are, but there's a lot of people who've got their hands in the pie of this $600 billion worth of profit every year, including these banks that I've mentioned, and they're going to fight tooth and nail to stop these drugs from being legalized, because those are tremendous profits. But again, if you can see a way that these largest banks, and the Chinese ones are bigger, so there may be foreign ones, and HSBC, of course, is an Asian bank. So if these banks aren't involved, I would like to know how that's possible, because these are the largest banks by market cap, and you can see that if you add the market cap of all these banks together, it's actually less than the yearly global drug profits, the market cap of the 10 largest US banks. So back to the charts, silver and gold are both kind of in that holding pattern. They both have that rounding up MACD. The one in gold is a little bit stronger, but the one in silver is a little bit sharper, and it's looking to cross. We're just above that 27 point, and of course with silver we have this massive flag formation that's bigger than anything. And if we do break out and get that move where some of the money begins to flow into silver, as I pointed out before, there's a very little amount of dollars that need to flow towards silver. If you can imagine, $600 billion a year that is transacted in drugs. If even a fraction of that money flowed towards the precious metals, it would just simply be an explosion in price. And we'll talk to you next time.